I still remember the day my daughter called me a burden. She didn't shout. She didn't even look angry. Her words were quiet, almost too calm, but they cut through me like a whisper that never fades. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that used to mean breakfast together, laughter, and the smell of warm tea drifting through the kitchen. Now, the same kitchen felt cold. The clock ticked louder than usual, and my hands trembled as I stirred the porridge, pretending not to hear what she had just said. "Ma, you don't have to cook anymore," she had said. "You should rest. You've done enough." But then, after a pause, one that stretched too long, she added softly, "Sometimes, it feels like you're just here out of habit. We're all busy, and it's getting hard for us to manage." That was the moment I knew. She didn't mean it out of cruelty. She just didn't see me anymore. I smiled, though my chest felt heavy. "Of course, dear," I said. "You're right, I'll rest," and I went back to stirring the porridge, as if it mattered. The thing about motherhood is you never stop loving, even when love feels one-sided. I had cooked her favorite meal that morning, rice cakes with coconut and jaggery. She loved them as a child. I thought maybe the taste would bring her closer to me again, even I'll rest. And I went back to stirring the porridge, as if it mattered. The thing about motherhood is you never stop loving, even when love feels one-sided. I had cooked her favorite meal that morning, rice cakes with coconut and jaggery. She loved them as a child. I thought maybe the taste would bring her closer to me again, even for a moment. But she didn't eat them. She left for work early, leaving her plate untouched on the table. I sat alone at that same table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The chair that once held her messy hair, bright eyes, chattering about her day. Now it was just an empty space that seemed to echo the silence I carried inside. Sometimes I wonder if mothers are meant to fade quietly like old photographs no one remembers, to dust. Still, even then, I kept cooking, because cooking felt like the last way to say, "I'm still here." The chair that once held her messy hair, bright eyes, chattering about her day. Now it was just an empty space that seemed to echo the silence I carried inside. Sometimes I wonder if mothers are meant to fade quietly like old photographs no one remembers, to dust. Still, even then, I kept cooking, because cooking felt like the last way to say, "I'm still here." I live in a small town near the hills. Our home sits at the end of a narrow lane lined with mango trees and fading white fences. It's an old house, 2 bedrooms, 1 kitchen, and a veranda where I used to sit with my late husband every evening, watching the sky turn orange. When he passed away 5 years ago, everything slowed down. The laughter, the voices, even the sound of the radio. My 2 children, Ria and Arav, were grown up by then. They had jobs in the city, busy lives, and their own families. At first, they called often. Every week, sometimes twice. "Ma, did you take your medicine? Ma, don't forget to eat." Their voices were my comfort. But as months turned into years, the calls grew shorter, then fewer, then, sometimes, not at all. Ria eventually asked me to come live with her and her husband. She said it would be easier to take care of me that way. I hesitated, but the house had grown too quiet. So I packed a small bag, locked the front door, and went with her. At first, everything seemed fine. She was kind, attentive, and her husband, Arjun, was polite. But slowly, I began to feel like a guest in my own daughter's home. The kitchen no longer smelled like mine. The cupboard space felt borrowed. Even my footsteps sounded too loud on the tiled floor. I tried to help, washing dishes, folding clothes, making tea. But she would often say, "Ma, don't bother. We have a maid for that." I miss the days when she needed me, when she'd sit by my side as I braided her hair before school, asking endless questions about the world. Now, she barely had time to look at me. Still, I told myself she's busy, she's tired, life in the city moves fast. So I stayed quiet. I learned to take smaller steps, to make less noise, to smile even when my heart ached. Because that's what mothers do. We shrink ourselves for the ones we love. The days that followed blurred into quiet routines. I would wake up before sunrise, like I always had back in my old home. The city outside Ria's apartment never truly slept. Even in the early hours, you could hear the distant hum of traffic, the barking of dogs, and sometimes the faint sound of a train. But inside, it was silent. I would stand by the window and make tea. Old habits don't go away easily. 2 cups. One for me, one for Ria. But she rarely joined me. She preferred to sleep in. Sometimes, I would place her cup on the counter, thinking maybe she would have it later. Most days, it would sit there until it went cold. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself she's working hard. She needs rest. But as weeks passed, I began to notice the distance between us growing in ways I couldn't ignore. Little things. The way she sighed when she saw me fold her laundry. Or how her husband looked uncomfortable when I joined them for dinner. They never said anything cruel. But it was the silence between words that hurt the most. I overheard them one evening. I overheard them talking in the living room. My room was down the hall, and their voices carried softly through the air. Arjun, she said quietly, Mom means well, but she doesn't understand how busy things are. Sometimes, I just need space, he replied in a tired tone. I know, she's not doing anything wrong, but it's hard to relax when she's always here, watching, helping. I stopped listening after that. I didn't need to hear more. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My heart didn't feel angry, just heavy. I kept thinking, how can a mother become a burden just by being present? The next morning, I pretended nothing had changed. I smiled at Ria, asked about her work, and offered to make breakfast. She gave me a polite nod and said, No ma, we'll order something. I sat quietly at the table while she scrolled through her phone. She didn't notice when I picked up the cup she hadn't touched. Later that day, I decided to step outside. There was a small park near the apartment, nothing like the open fields of my hometown, but it had a few trees and benches. I sat there for hours, watching children play and mothers call out their names. I missed the noise of my own children, their laughter, their fights, even their mess. A little boy ran past me holding a balloon, and for a moment I saw my son, Arav, in him, the way he used to run into my arms after school, sweaty and smiling, with scraped knees and stories about cricket. It's strange how memories come back when the present feels too quiet. A week later, Arav called. It had been nearly 3 months since his last call. Ma, how are you? He asked, his voice cheerful but distant. I'm fine, Beta, I replied. How's work? He talked about his new project, his new car, and his new apartment. Not once did he ask if I was happy at Ria's place. I didn't tell him anything either. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. A week later, Arav called. It had been nearly 3 months since his last call. Before hanging up, I said softly, come. Before hanging up, I said softly, come visit sometime. I'll make your favorite curry. He chuckled. Soon, Ma, just not this month. Things are hectic. Before hanging up, I said softly, come visit sometime. I'll make your favorite curry. I smiled into the silence that followed. Of course, that evening, when Ria came home, she looked tired. I tried to lighten her mood. Arav called today. She looked up briefly. Oh, how's he? Busy, as always, I said. She nodded and went back to typing on her laptop. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Then I quietly went to the kitchen and started chopping vegetables. Cooking was the only way I knew to feel useful, to feel present. The smell of spices filled the apartment, and for a while, I almost felt at home again. But when dinner was ready, no one came to eat. Ma, Ria called out, we already ordered pizza. You didn't have to cook. I froze for a second. Oh, I didn't know. It's okay, she said, her tone flat. We'll eat your curry tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. One night, it rained heavily. Thunder rolled across the city, and I could hear the wind rattling the windows. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The streetlights flickered outside, and I thought of my old veranda back home, the smell of wet earth, the sound of my husband's soft laughter, and the warmth of knowing I belonged somewhere. Here, I felt invisible. I thought about going back to my old house, but it was falling apart, and I didn't have anyone there. Besides, what would people say? That poor woman couldn't stay with her own children. No, I couldn't bear that. So I stayed, and I learned to disappear quietly inside the same walls where my daughter lived. But pain has a way of showing up in small, unexpected moments. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when I noticed Ria's old shawl, the red one I had knitted for her during her college days. It was buried at the bottom of her closet, untouched. I remembered how she used to wear it every winter. How proud she was when her friends admired it. I took it out and brushed off the dust. When she saw me holding it, her face tightened slightly. Ma, you don't have to go through my things. I was just folding the clothes, I said quietly. I thought you might still wear this. She sighed. That's old, Ma. I don't wear things like that anymore. I nodded and placed it back. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The shawl wasn't just cloth, it was years of my love, my warmth, my presence. And now it meant nothing. The tension grew quietly, like fog. She started spending more time in her room, eating separately. I began to notice the subtle changes. She didn't ask about my day anymore, or if I needed anything. One day, her husband, Arjun, spoke gently but firmly. Ma, Ria and I have been talking. We think maybe you'd be happier if you visited Ara for a while. I smiled faintly. Is that what she wants? He hesitated. She worries you might feel lonely here. I wanted to tell him I already feel lonely here, but instead, I said, all right, I'll talk to him. When Ria came home that night, I asked, do you really think I should go? She avoided my eyes. Just for a while. Ma, change is good. You've been here for months. Her words were polite, but her tone carried relief. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the small suitcase I had brought when I first arrived. It was still neatly packed with the same clothes, as if I had never truly unpacked. I realized then that maybe I had been waiting for this moment all along, waiting to be asked to leave. Still, I smiled to myself and whispered, "You raised her strong, independent. Isn't that what you wanted?" But the truth was, no matter how strong your children become, a mother's heart always hopes to remain needed even just a little. Before I left, I decided to cook one last meal, not out of guilt or sadness but love. I wanted her to remember something good about me. I made her favorite rice cakes with coconut and jaggery, just like when she was little. As the sweet smell filled the kitchen, I felt a strange peace settle in my chest. When she came out, she looked surprised. "Ma, you didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," I said. "You used to love this, remember?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Yes, I did." For a brief moment, the distance between us disappeared. But just as quickly, it returned when her phone buzzed and she walked away mid-conversation. I sat at the table alone again, the steam rising from the food, untouched. That night, I cried quietly for the first time in years. Not because she had hurt me, but because I had realized something. I had built my whole life around people who no longer needed me. The rising conflict wasn't in our words, it was in everything left unsaid. The morning I was supposed to leave, the city felt unusually quiet. Even the usual traffic seemed slower, the air heavy with the kind of silence that says something is ending. I woke up early, as I always did. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the faint orange glow slipped through the curtains. I boiled water for tea, letting the kettle whistle just a second longer than usual, as if holding on to that small, familiar sound. My small suitcase sat near the door, zipped and ready. Inside were a few saris, my husband's old shawl, and the red photo album of my children growing up. That album had traveled with me through every stage of life, from their first birthdays to their weddings. Now, it was all I had left that felt truly mine. Rhea came out of her room, still in her work clothes from the night before. She looked startled to see me dressed and ready. "Ma, you're leaving so early?" I smiled softly. "Yes, the bus leaves at 9. I thought I'd make breakfast before I go." She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Maybe she was going to tell me not to bother, but I was grateful she didn't. As I mixed the batter, I found myself humming an old tune, something my mother used to sing while cooking. It felt comforting, almost like she was there with me. Rhea sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. I wanted to say something, anything to make that silence between us feel less sharp. So I said, "You know, when you were little, you used to sit right beside me while I cooked. You'd dip your fingers into the batter and giggle when I pretended to scold you." She looked up for a second, her lips forming a faint smile. "Yes," she said quietly. "I remember." That one small word, remember, filled the room like sunlight. For a brief moment, I thought maybe things weren't as broken as I feared. Maybe she just needed time. When breakfast was ready, I placed her plate on the table and sat across from her. We ate quietly, but it was peaceful. It reminded me of the old mornings back home when the world still felt simple. Then, just as we finished, her phone buzzed again. She looked down, sighed, and said, "Ma, don't forget to lock the door when you leave. Arjun will come by later to drop you at the station." I nodded, though my heart sank a little. I had hoped she'd come with me, maybe even wave me goodbye. But I didn't say it. Mothers learn early that love isn't about asking, it's about accepting. After she left for work, I sat in the quiet apartment, staring at the clock. The second hand ticked slowly, echoing through the room. I looked around. The kitchen counters were spotless, the table empty, the curtains swaying gently with the wind. Everything looked perfect, except for the space it left inside me. Then I noticed something on the couch, her office ID card. She had forgotten it. I looked around. The kitchen counters were spotless, the table empty, the curtains swaying gently with the wind. Everything looked perfect, except for the space it left inside me. Then I noticed something on the couch, her office ID card. She had forgotten it. The streets were crowded but familiar in their own way. Vendors calling out, children running to school, buses honking impatiently. It felt alive, and for a few moments, I felt alive with it. When I reached her office, I waited outside near the reception. The lady at the desk smiled politely. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm here to give this to my daughter," I said, holding up the ID card. "She forgot it." The lady nodded and called someone. Moments later, Rhea came rushing down the hallway. Her expression changed when she saw me. "Ma, what are you doing here?" "I brought this," I said, smiling. "You left it at home." She glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. "Ma, you shouldn't have come all this way. You could have called." I was just about to go back for it. Her tone wasn't angry, just sharp, embarrassed maybe. I looked behind her and saw her colleagues watching curiously. "Oh," I said quietly. I just thought, she interrupted, whispering, "It's okay, Ma, I'll take it. You should go now. I'll call you later." She took the card, gave me a quick nod, and turned away before I could say another word. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure of where to look. Everyone went back to their work, and the noise of the office swallowed me whole. So I left. It was drizzling when I stepped outside. Tiny drops of rain clung to my hair and face as I walked slowly toward the bus stop. I didn't even open my umbrella. The street was crowded, yet I had never felt so alone. By the time I reached the station, Arjun was already there, holding my ticket. He smiled kindly. "Ma, let me take your bag." "Thank you," I said softly. He looked guilty, maybe even sorry, but I didn't want to make it harder for him. He was a good man, just caught in the middle of what families often become: polite distance. We stood in silence until the bus arrived. When it did, he handed me the ticket and said, "Call us when you reach." "Ma." I nodded. "Take care of her. She works too much." He smiled faintly. I climbed aboard, found a window seat, and placed my bag beside me. As the bus started to move, I looked out the window, the city fading slowly, the buildings blurring behind the mist. And there it was, my reflection against the glass, eyes tired but calm. For the first time, I didn't feel angry or sad. I just felt finished. Finished with trying to belong in places that no longer had room for me. The journey back to my small hometown took hours. The farther I went, the quieter the world became. Fields replaced buildings, and the smell of rain-soaked soil replaced the city air. When I reached, the small bus stop was empty. The same old man still ran the tea stall, and when he saw me, his face lit up. "Back home, Mirajai?" he asked. "Yes," I said with a small smile. "For good, this time?" He nodded knowingly. "Nothing like home, huh?" I smiled again but didn't answer. When I unlocked the door to my old house, a wave of memories rushed in. The creak of the wooden floor, the faint smell of sandalwood, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, except older, dustier, lonelier. I walked into the kitchen and ran my fingers along the counter. The shelves were empty, but I still remembered where everything used to be. And then, without planning to, I started cooking. Not because I was hungry, but because it was the only thing that made me feel alive. As the aroma of spices filled the air, tears rolled down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of pain anymore. They were release. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink. Children were playing in the street, their laughter echoing like music. For the first time in months, I felt peace even in the emptiness. I realized then that I didn't need to wait for my children to make me feel loved. Love was still here, in the air, in the home I built, in the small things that made life beautiful. Still, as the night deepened, I couldn't help but think, would they ever realize what they had lost? The next morning, a knock on the door startled me. When I opened it, I found a delivery man holding a box parcel for Mrs. Mira. He said. I frowned, signing for it. Inside was a neatly wrapped gift and a small note. It was from Ria. The note read, "Ma, I'm sorry for how things turned out. I found your old recipe book and realized how much I miss your food and you. Thank you for always loving me, even when I didn't deserve it." My hands trembled as I unfolded the rest of the note. "I'm coming to visit next week. Let me cook for you this time." I sat down slowly, clutching the letter to my chest. Tears fell again, but this time, they were warm. That was the moment I realized forgiveness wasn't something you give once. It's something you carry even when no one asks for it. That was my turning point. The day I stopped waiting to be needed, and simply started being. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth through love, service, and patience. But love, I realized, doesn't need to prove itself, it just is. The week passed slower than usual. Each day felt long, but not heavy, more like the calm before rain. I spent most of my time cleaning the house, airing out the old curtains, dusting the furniture that had been asleep under white sheets. It wasn't just cleaning, it was remembering. Every corner whispered a memory. The wall clock that had stopped years ago. The rocking chair where my husband used to read the newspaper every evening. The smell of turmeric and old wood, faint, but still there. Sometimes I caught myself smiling for no reason. Maybe it was hope, that shy, quiet kind of hope you don't speak out loud because it feels too fragile. I baked her favorite sweet coconut ladoos and stored them in a tin box. They were a little misshapen, not perfect, but made with the same love as before. That's the thing about mothers, even when our hands grow older, our love doesn't. The day she was supposed to arrive, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still gray, the kind of color that promises warm soon. The day she was supposed to arrive, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still gray, the kind of color that promises warm soon. I made tea, set 2 cups on the table, and waited. The bus from the city usually reached by 9. By 8:30, I was standing at the gate, my dupatta fluttering in the soft breeze. The lane outside my house was quiet except for the sound of sparrows. When the bus finally came into view, my heart began to race the same way it used to when I waited for her outside school as a little girl. The door opened, and there she was, suitcase in hand, eyes searching for me. When she saw me, she smiled, not the polite kind she gave before, but the real one, soft and full of something unspoken. "Ma," she said, almost a whisper. I didn't wait for her to come closer. I went straight to her and held her tight. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Her body trembled just a little, and I realized she was crying. "Shh," I said, brushing her hair gently. "You're home now." Inside the house, everything felt warmer somehow. She looked around the living room, touching the old photo frames and laughing softly. "You kept everything just the same," she said. Of course, I smiled. I was waiting for my daughter to come back and move it all around again. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Ma, for everything, for not listening, for being." I stopped her right there. "Beta," I said quietly, "you don't have to explain. The world outside makes people forget things. I understand." She shook her head. "No, Ma, I forgot you, and I shouldn't have." I took her hand and placed it on my heart. The next few days were simple, and maybe that's why they felt so beautiful. We cooked together in the kitchen, just like old times. She chopped the vegetables while I made the dough. We talked about small things, her work, my garden, the neighbor's new puppy. No big apologies, no heavy conversations, just quiet presence. That's how forgiveness feels sometimes, not loud, not dramatic, but soft, like a blanket wrapped around an old wound. One evening, while we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Ma, can I tell you something?" Of course. I thought success would make me happy. I thought being busy meant being important. But I've never felt as peaceful as I do right now, just sitting here with you. I smiled and said, "Sometimes we spend half our lives running, only to realize what we were chasing was waiting right here all along." She rested her head on my shoulder. The last bit of sunlight glowed across the fields, turning everything golden. For the first time in years, the silence between us felt full, not empty. A few days later, she asked if she could stay longer. I told her she didn't need to ask. "This is your home," I said. "You can stay as long as your heart wants." So she did. She started helping around the house, planting flowers, painting the fence, even chatting with the neighbors. Sometimes she'd take long walks to the river and come back with stories. One evening, I heard her talking on the phone with her husband. "I think I want to stay here for a while," she said softly. "No, not because I'm upset, because I finally feel grounded." I smiled quietly from the next room. For once, she wasn't running from something, she was returning to herself. One afternoon, while sorting old things, she found her father's diary. She sat on the floor, flipping through the pages. "Ma," she said, her voice trembling a little, "he wrote about us." I sat beside her as she read aloud a few lines. It said, "The children will grow, the house will get quieter, but Mira's heart will never be empty. It carries all of us inside it." We both cried then, not from sadness, but from gratitude. It felt like he was with us again, blessing our small reunion from wherever he was. On her last evening before returning to the city, we sat by the riverbank. The sky was painted in orange and violet streaks, fireflies flickered in the distance, and the smell of jasmine floated through the air. She said, "Ma, I don't think I can go back to living the same way again." I nodded slowly. "Then don't. You can build your life differently now." She smiled, looking out at the calm water. "You always make everything sound simple." "Because it is," I said. "We just make it harder in our minds." Then she reached for my hand. "Promise me you won't stay alone too much, Ma." I squeezed her hand gently. "And promise me you'll remember, no matter how far you go, this is still your home." She nodded, her eyes glistening. That night, after she packed, we sat together one last time. No words, just the sound of crickets and the slow turning of time. Before bed, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for forgiving me." I smiled. A mother's heart doesn't know anything else. The next morning, I watched her bus disappear down the road. I didn't cry this time, because now I knew love doesn't fade with distance. It finds its way back, quietly, in its own time. As I walked back home, the sunlight filtered through the trees, and the air smelled of wet earth and promise. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving me back my daughter, not just in body, but in heart." And for the first time in many years, I felt completely whole. Later that evening, I sat with a cup of tea on the porch, the same place where everything had started. The world around me was calm, children laughing, bells from the temple ringing faintly, the soft breeze carrying the scent of home-cooked meals. I thought of all the years I had spent waiting, hurting, hoping, and I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I gave my children. It was the gift that freed me. Forgiveness turned my loneliness into peace, my pain into understanding, and my waiting into love that no longer needed to be returned to be real. That's the thing about being a mother. Even when life forgets you for a while, you never stop loving, you never stop hoping, and somehow in the quietest way life brings that love back to your doorstep. And when it does, you don't need words. You just smile, open your arms and whisper, "Welcome home." The days that followed were quieter, but not lonely anymore. The kind of quiet that feels gentle, like a song fading into silence. My daughter called me every few days now, sometimes just to ask about the garden or to tell me how the rain sounded where she lived. It wasn't about words, it was about presence. We were learning each other again, slowly, tenderly. I kept her favorite meal ready every time she visited. Simple rice, dal, and spiced vegetables, the same comfort she grew up with. And each time she took a bite, she would smile and say, "No one cooks like you, Ma." Those words meant more to me than any apology could, because they weren't just about food, they were about love finding its way home. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the fields. The air smelled of wet earth and jasmine, that small town peace I had once taken for granted. Children's laughter echoed from far away, and the sound of a distant train carried through the wind. I thought of all the years that had passed, the arguments, the silence, the waiting. And yet, in that moment, none of it hurt anymore, because love had returned, quieter, softer, wiser. You see, forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it simply opens a door, so love can walk back in, and sometimes, that's all a mother needs, just one open door. I've learned something through all this. When people say harsh words, they often come from tired hearts. Sometimes your children don't see your sacrifices until life teaches them what love truly costs, but a mother's love, it doesn't wait for recognition, it simply gives again and again, like sunlight through a window. So when she called me a burden, I didn't hold it against her, because I knew one day, when the noise of the world quieted, she'd remember who stood by her in silence. Now, when I wake up each morning, I don't rush or worry. I make my tea, water my plants, and whisper a small prayer for my children. Now, when I wake up each morning, I don't rush or worry.